I just really had been seeking the Lord all the way from mid-year till the end of 2018, just saying, God, what am I doing? You know, where am I going? What do you have for me? And in December, I heard a very clear call from the Lord, and he gave me a couple of visions and some dreams to confirm it, and just all these things lined up, and I felt like he was moving me from here over to here and calling me up off the bleachers. If y'all know me, during the fall, I am a super Panther fan. I will be in church, but I may leave early for games. I hoop and holler like crazy at the Panther games, but I do that in worship too, so I think this balances out. But I felt the Lord kind of calling me out in December, calling me up. And if you know anything of what we've done in the past, I've been to Bible school and served in 2 churches. I've been in ministry for close to 20 years. And since we've been here, I've been waiting, sitting and waiting. I've been doing some things, a few things here, a few things there, and as the Lord will open up some doors. I had 2 dreams. I was really, when I have these reoccurring dreams, I've had them my entire Christian walk, mostly. And when I have them, I know that I'm moving in fear. So the Lord calls me up off the bench, and I have these 2 dreams, and one is the fear of missing God's plan for my life. The second one is the fear of man putting me into a box. I actually have that fear. I actually am afraid that people, it's probably because it's happened so often, but those are 2 real fears, and the Lord I'll have these dreams, and then I know immediately what I'm moving in, and I've got to step back and say, okay, this is not good. So, you know, when the Lord calls you up off the bench, I knew I had to talk to Matt and Darlene. You just don't come up off the bench by yourself. You've got to communicate that with your leadership. And I started to have those fears, and those dreams popped up. And I was like, God, you know, why am I having this? Why is this popping up in me? And whenever I sense fear, I have to find the serpent and cut its head. Like, I have to. I just cannot function as a Christian without doing it. So little by little, I'm praying about it, and I'm like, you know, what is it about Matt and Darlene that I'm afraid to be put into a box? And Lord, well, why do I feel like I'm going to miss out? And then January rolled around, and I had a pretty major crisis in my life. And when that happens, you know, stuff will bubble up to the top, and you will see really where you stand and who you are and what you're made of and what you're not made of, and where you thought you were and you really aren't. And through that, I had to cleave to these guys. I needed their spiritual mother and father's heart to cover me through that battle. And as I was doing this, little bits of things kept popping up against them. Me, against them. Like, what have they done to me? Besides have a really weird accent. Nothing. And I was like, Lord, okay, I've got to face this. I have to know what is keeping me back. And so as I was digging through and started to try to pull stuff together, a few things that I found, I felt like I was holding back from telling them what I felt like God called me to. I was afraid to tell them. I was afraid to be vulnerable. I was concerned that they might judge me. Seriously? Okay, how's that? Test. I was afraid they would judge me. If you've ever been a woman in any form of ministry, and you have ever had to stand up in some form of ministry, there's this thing that's just there. If you've ever been too young, and you're the one out there having to lead, there's just this thing. And it's out there. And the title of my message is How the Grinch Stole Christians. And last Saturday night, a group of us went to a Mexican restaurant, and I kid you not, I wasn't going to title it because, I don't know, I'm quirky, and maybe not everybody gets the whole Grinch thing, but we were at the checkout, there was a little Grinch figurine on top of and we randomly picked this restaurant last Saturday night with my church family, and there's this silly little Grinch on top of the cash register, and I was like, okay, that's it. I knew I needed to get free of this junk. I don't need a wall between me and my pastors. I don't need a wall between my spiritual covering and my spiritual mom and dad, so to speak. I needed to bring down my mistrust. And what I did when I started to kind of pick it apart and try to find it, I found some things. And as I was doing it, I thought, is somebody else in our church maybe feel, or have they ever felt the same way? Have you ever come to church and you just stood there and like Brian said, we estimate 100 people in here. Have you ever stood in here and just felt lonely? Have you ever went to like a women's gathering, a men's gathering, and you felt like there was a glass and you're like on the outside looking in, and look at who's talking. Miss Outgoing, Miss Everybody's my BFF, and I was feeling that way. Have you ever walked up to a group that was talking and all of a sudden they got really quiet and you thought, were they talking about me? As I started like peeling this onion back, I thought, man, I wonder if anybody else. And you just never share something with Christina because she will always confirm it. I started to ask the Lord, how do I get rid of it? How do I thought I had gotten past it. I needed to lose my mind. I needed to separate my past and completely abandon myself to what's going on today. And as I started to think about that, and I'm thinking about this couple, and they're going to feel really picked on by the end of the service, but hopefully it'll turn around for the good. I kept thinking about them, and I'm thinking, they've never hurt me. They've never spoken ill of me. They've only encouraged and exhorted and encouraged me to do more. And I'm like, okay, Lord, what is in here? And what I found is I was kind of dragging around a bag of stuff. And I brought it into this family. I was a guardian at Lightham in the city of in Mecklenburg County for a couple of years, which means I was a court-appointed advocate for foster kids. And you've never seen such a feeling of being orphaned and adoption than you do in our foster care system. And I feel like I had been dragging around something from my old life, my old family, and I brought it right into the middle of this family with you. And I'm tripping over it every time I talk to Tom, or I go and hang out with Miriam or Amy or Brian or Rocky and Mary. I've been dragging this old family around with me for a long time, and I didn't realize it. had actually begun, after 7 years of doing this, I began to move in an orphan spirit, feeling alone or isolated, not being able to fully commit. Okay, let me step on my toes, but your toes too. Have you ever just thought, oh, I gotta go to church because I'm supposed to be in the nursery? The nursery's like the worst, right? It's not. It's actually the best ministry in the whole church. Or I told pastor I was going to be there, and it's an obligation. Could you maybe be carrying something around that's festering in an orphan spirit? Inclusion is never achieved when you're an orphan. Hi. You can self-medicate by pulling inward, and worst of all, becoming apathetic. And I just wanted to take a second to talk to you about apathetic in Ephesians 4:19. Apathy, I believe, I think, and Gary, you can come up later and tell me this ain't so. I think apathy is the number one death to any Christian sitting in a church. It's the start of a death. Ephesians 4:19. And this is talking about the Lord's authority. Live no longer as Gentiles do, hopelessly confused. Their minds are full of darkness and wander far from the life God has given us because they have closed their minds and hardened their hearts against Him. They have no sense of shame. They live lustful pleasures and eagerly practice every kind of impurity. And I think that may be the one of those. Rats. That's on my phone. Yeah, I think it's the wrong verse. No, maybe it's the wrong chapter. I'm sorry.
No, it's 4's correct.
Is it?
Yeah.
I was going to say, you probably have that.
Yeah.
I probably fat-fingered it on my notes. All right. Some of you that'll drive that crazy, you can keep looking for it. Apathy is when we begin to dissociate. We begin to pull away from one another, from the fellowship of the brethren. And it can lead to shame and all kinds of sins. There's actually several sins listed in there. Disassociation leads to more apathy. All of these can lead to alienation. And how many of you are not from the United States originally? You were born somewhere else. Raise your hand high. Woo-hoo. Where were you born? Japan. Awesome. So I've gone on missions trips. I have been in foreign nations, and I've been to Kenya. And Kenya is probably one of the places, in Venezuela, I think, too. I felt like an alien. And here in the U.S., we use that term as extraterrestrial, but the word alien literally means you weren't part of that culture. So most of the time, though, when I do travel to foreign nations, I don't always feel that way, like, because I'm just really, I can get in there. But if you've ever visited another country, or if you've ever lived in another country, and there's these gaps in language, and you just feel really frustrated. I'm looking for an interpreter. And then one country, I was in the Czech Republic, and my interpreter fell out in the spirit. I was like, oh, that was really good. Who gave me the intercessor? Like, don't do that to me. In fact, I'm willing to pay for a secular translator so they won't fall out. But if you've ever felt that way, like a foreigner, or an alien, we can get that way in the body. In this family, you can get to a place where you walk away from a fellowship and you're like, I just don't feel like I connected. I felt like they were speaking a different language. This is all part of that orphan spirit. Sometimes when operating out of an orphan spirit, we try to compensate or perform. So what did I do? Since I've been feeling this way, kind of feeling the separation, we started house group at our house for 2 years. We had the New Beginnings fellowship at our house. I had Friday night friend night, and we were inviting people, and yet I was still feeling this separation from you guys. Has anybody felt that? Anybody else felt that besides me? The way to break out of those bits and pieces is to truly be adopted. And for me, it's super easy for me to understand the adoption of the Father. I grew up in a really big family, and for many years, my siblings convinced me I was adopted. After I was old enough to research it, I did verify I am truly my mother and father's. And they had told me I was from Africa. It must have been prophetic. That I was a daughter of Kunta Kinte. And then they did the Simba thing. They used to hold me up and they go, hi, hi, hi. And my siblings did that to me. Anybody else? Come on now. Somebody's siblings had to have treated them fairly poorly. Tell them that they weren't really their parents. The way we overcome that orphan spirit is through adoption. And for me, when I got saved, knowing that I know that I know that I know that I was his, that was just like a done deal in my heart. And I'm either all in or I'm all out. There's no halfway for me. And I know that's not the same for everyone, but when I finally gave my heart to the Lord, I was all spanking in. I was all in. And I knew, no matter what, I knew that he was my Father and I was his. And I learned to walk in that, and that part was easy for me. It was you guys that's the hard part. And what I realized is I've been in this church and I have felt this separation, this not being fully connected, not being plugged in, when you're, Amy is, how far along are you? 19 weeks. There's 2 ways to have children, right? Organic or adoption. Only 2 ways. Adoption, when we were studying this out, Rainbow was reading some stuff to me, and then I confirmed it with Pastor Matt, because he's adopted 4 children. Adoption is one of the most difficult things to undo legally. In fact, what did they ask you at the adoption ceremony? They said, you realize you can't go back, or something. Like, the judge is trying to talk them out of it, at that point. It is 100% irrevocable. Your natural children could have an easier time emancipating themselves than you could to get rid of an adopted child. That's how much stronger that bond is. And so I'm walking around feeling like this, just not fully connected. I had good moments. I've been here 7 years. You don't stick around 7 years if you're all depressed and all alone, right? I make my own party, if you haven't noticed. But that part of the adoption part that I missed is, yes, I'm fully grafted in with the Lord, but I didn't realize I was grafted in with you. Were we able to pull up that other picture? There was one more picture on the computer. Here you go. This is a 5-in-1 apple tree. They take the root stock and they graft in 5 different branches of apples. There are Red Delicious, Golden Delicious, Yellow Delicious, Jonathan, and I think a Gala on that tree. All 5 of those are different trees that got grafted in. And they've done this with every fruit out there. They have made the 5-in-1 peach tree, pear tree, apples, citrus, all of these, they've grafted them in successfully. But grafting is painful. It takes cutting. It takes severing. And then they wrap the new branch around the rootstock. They bandage it and allow the natural sapping of the tree to meld it back together. And then the branch that's cut in now gets its life from the rootstock. And we all get that concept because he says, I am the vine, you are the branches. I am the vine. But how many of us, it's only been the Father? How many of us have really likened ourselves one to another? Go to Africa with Tom and Lisa for 2 weeks. You're going to get grafted in. You are going to get grafted in. The spirit of adoption, when a true adoption is happening within a family, we're secure. We celebrate each other. Competitiveness goes away. Acceptance. Emotional voids are filled with intimacy and love. Allowing and having the freedom to move in our gift and our callings. So let me go back. I said, in December, I felt like the Lord said, Amber, come up off the bench. It's time to dust your booty off and get up and start. I knew what that meant. I know what that means. And I'm to get up and I'm to do that. But with this wall of mistrust that I didn't realize was there, not fully feeling or allowing myself to be adopted, my gifts and my callings are stifled. And you guys have seen me minister like that. I'm still ministering. I'm still doing things. But truly, when we are really grafted in and cut deep, one with another, her life is going to flow through my life, who's going to flow through her life and your life. That's what it's going to take to win this city. That's what it's going to take, is this love that's beyond comprehension. The last thing, or a couple last things, when a true spirit of adoption is flowing, we freely receive the Father's love. We're able to freely give. Call and motivation to action. Being open to being sent. True identity in Christ. If you have gotten stagnant and it's just feeling like you're just going through the motions, I want to stir you up tonight. And maybe it's been a really, really, really long time. You've been to a couple of churches and you've not felt what I'm telling you about. I want to say tonight's going to be that cutting part for you tonight. You should not be here and not feel and sense acceptance. They don't give us a reason otherwise. And I'm looking around and I know several of you have been here a lot, even longer than me. You guys would say the same thing from this couple, from this spiritual mom and dad. I need them to release me. I need them to call out my gifts and my talents. I need their anointing to flow down and through this little cut branch And I'm just a low branch. I'm not some of the big branches like Tom and Marco and Doug and these guys. Like, I'm just this little low branch, but I'm going to do my part. I know. I want to do my part because my part flows through your part and your part flows through my part. I'm tired. I'm tired of doing it by myself. I'm tired of praying by myself. I'm tired of 6 years of intercession without feeling fully connected. It's too much for me. I have to be connected. And I think at the core of every person in this room, I know it from the foster care system, the core of every child is the need to be needed and the need to be loved. This is a new family, a new day. I was dragging some old church stuff from an old family. I have a friend that they were in the foster care system. They felt a call. Literally, some people get called to missions, some people called to the U.S. They were called to adopt children. They adopted 13 children. I learned so much from them. Every child would show up at their door, and some of these kids would literally be ripped away from their parent in one moment, driven across town with a complete stranger, and brought into your home. And every child came with baggage. Not just emotional, not just spiritual, but physically baggage. And once they're plopped into that new family, they claw at everything they can get for stability and security and protection and to know they're loved. This is the last thing I wanted to share is when we join ourselves together, I'm not sure quite how to describe it, but when I was sending my oldest daughter off to college, I was sitting down, I'll never forget it. It was the most tormenting moment of my life, one of the most tormenting moments of my life. I'm helping her fill out a college application, but I don't want her to leave. But I'm helping her fill out the application, but I don't want her, I was sitting there like fighting within my own body. And I knew she had to go, but I didn't want her to go. I knew she had to go, but I didn't want her to go. And that same daughter, after she got married, it was probably about 5-6 months into their marriage. And she called on the phone and she said, "Mom, I need you to settle something for me." I'm like, okay. Her husband's standing there. He can hear me on the phone. She said, "Mom, David says I call you guys too much. Is that true?" And I was like, okay, this is not the moment to have this conversation. But I said, well, what did David say? She goes, well, he says, I'm asking you guys everything. I should be asking him everything. And I didn't address it in the moment, but a little bit later, I took her aside and I loved on her as a mother. And I said, honey, I don't care what you were arguing about. If your husband says you're talking to us too much, you're talking to us too much. You need to start taking that to him. And I love you and I don't want to lose that with you, but you need to cleave to your husband. And that's what I want to do tonight is I really believe the Lord, kind of like it is in marriage, when we leave our mother and father's household, we're to cleave unto our spouse. We're to become part of their family. And the word cleave, I looked it up in both the Hebrew, because that scripture is actually written twice. It's in Genesis and Ephesians. The word in Hebrew, cleave, means to leave, forsake, loose, close. Ruth clung or cleave to Naomi. And then Boaz told Ruth to cleave to his fields. To cleave to his fields. In the Greek, it means, it's kind of a little bit more of elaborate language. Leave behind, desert, abandon, forsake. Glue to one another. This kind of glue in the Greek is so united closely together, it's actually more permanent than the original structure. So I had to leave spiritually my mother and father. I organically got saved in my old church. And I didn't realize I had never really clung to this church. I've never really cleaved to this body. And I really believe that is that window of being on the outside looking in is not really trusting you. Because that's truly what it is. I did not trust. I was afraid you'd put me in a box. I was afraid you were going to judge me. I was afraid you weren't going to like my theology. Or I was afraid you wouldn't like the version of the Bible I read. Because I read a kid's version. Judge me. All right, Tom, thanks. Tonight, we've got a prayer team that's going to come. And we want to tackle, this is the start of tackling, if there's any walls. Maybe the Lord's already kind of pricked something in your heart. Maybe he's already something popped into your head, a moment, like walking into a women's ministry Christmas party, and that when you walk in, you just feel a little lost. Or you drive away from church thinking, I didn't connect with anybody. Tonight, I want it to be a starter point. And we're gonna pray for you guys to, if the Lord is showing you something specific, let's start dealing with it. Let's bring the wall I put up around him and her. What better parents to be adopted by? British man, a Canadian woman, who are now U.S., typically they were foreigners. At one point, aliens, I like that word better. But now they're U.S. citizens, and they've adopted 4 kids. Who better to get it? Who better to trust? Who better to kind of open up your heart and say, call Matt this week, man. If you're like, man, something Amber said, I do feel lonely. I do feel isolated at times. We've got to stop it. And we've got to bring the walls down, because what we're doing is we're putting them in a box. The very thing I feared, I was doing to them. And it stifles me. I can't breathe. I can't live. And I can't do what I'm supposed to be doing here. Which my job's the crazy, by the way. None of you can have that. So, Lord, right now, we just love on you. Yes. We just abandon everything over to you. I thank you, God, that I know that I've been adopted into your family, and it's a permanent adoption. But, Lord, I know that you've been digging down deep inside of me, and you have shown inside me some areas that I have not likened to myself or cleaved to this body, this family. I'm like that orphan child. I'm like that foster care kid holding onto her bag and clawing for everything I can get. And tonight, Lord, I'm going to let go. And I thank you for my spiritual mom and dad that birthed me into this world. Whew. I had a great church experience, Lord. I was raised up. as a toddler and then a teenager and then an adult in the spirit things. And I was released well. I was released well. There's no injury there. But God, I just didn't realize I needed to quit calling my old mom and my old dad. Because you've called me here. You've likened me to this place and this family. They are my lifeblood.
Thank you.
Lord, I just pray that tonight's the start. We're going to have the prayer team go ahead and come up. Mike, can you come up and play?